It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The
People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Saturday night, and this is the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes, along with Albie Corner, Georgia Gilliland, Alex Armstrong and Benjamin Butterworth. Tonight on the show...
The general election's been called, and it's going to be closer than we think.
Labour is planning to rig all our future general elections.
London's Jews stand strong against the Hamas horde.
Is Nigel Farage a cop-out? And why school teachers should accommodate phones in the classroom.
It's 6 p.m, and this is the Saturday 5. A very warm welcome along to the Saturday 5. We've waited for years. Prime Ministers have come and gone, careers have risen and fallen, but as the rain poured down on Downing Street and the nation looked on expectantly, it finally happened. Someone emailed GB News saying they agreed with Benjamin Butterworth. The wokeest non-gender-aligned person in Britain is back for more, and his old sparring partner Albie Corner has jetted back from holiday to join the fun too. But I'm afraid there's no Ben Leo this week. But lovers of annoyingly overconfident young right-wingers need not despair. The one and only Alex Armstrong is present and correct. Now, keeping a measure of order and making her debut on the show, the brilliant freelance journalist, Georgia Gilliland. Now, folks, you all know the drill. We outline our argument about a chosen topic, then we all pile in and the fur starts to fly. And, of course, we want your views as well, much more important than ours. Send them to gbnews.com/yoursay. Join the conversation there. But before we start tearing each other apart, it's time for your Saturday Night News with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's exactly 6:02, our top stories this hour. The Prime Minister says voters and their families would be at risk under a Labour government. Posting in a long thread on X, Rishi Sunak claimed that Labour doesn't have a plan and said that would give, quote, our enemies the chance to take advantage of our weakness. The Tories are trying to make security a key dividing line between themselves and Sir Keir Starmer's party after pledging to raise defence spending to 2.5% by 2030. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says the voting age should be lowered to 16. Both major parties have been pitching their messages to voters on the first weekend of this election campaign, with the government focusing on the economy. Speaking to reporters, the Labour leader said young people deserve to have a say.
I want to see 16 and 17-year-olds voting. They can go out and work. They can serve in our armed forces. And, of course, if they are out and working, they pay tax. And therefore, they should have a say over how the money they're paying in is being used. So, yes, I want to see that vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. If you can work, you can pay tax, if you can serve in your armed forces, then you ought to be able to vote.
78 Tory MPs have now stepped down ahead of the summer election, which is a post-war record. It also surpasses the previous high, which took place prior to Tony Blair's victory back in 1997. It comes as the Tories trail in the polls. Lib Dem leader Sir Eb Davey says his party is ready for a new parliament.
The Liberal Democrats have got a fantastic set of policies on the health service, on the economy and the environment. Today we're campaigning against the sewage problem. We've led that campaign. I think overall we're just much more ambitious than some of the other parties. And critically, we want to transform British politics. We think the politics in our country is broken. It needs to be changed. And we're the only party talking about that.
In other news, an RAF aircraft believed to be a Spitfire has crashed in Lincolnshire. The single-occupant plane crashed into a field near RAF Coningsby. No one else was believed to be involved. Police and emergency services rushed to the scene just before 1:20 this afternoon. It's thought that the aircraft was taking part in a Battle of Britain memorial event. Well, congestion in Dover has eased slightly now, though drivers are still facing waits of up to 90 minutes, we're told. An estimated 20 million cars have hit the roads this bank holiday weekend. The Port of Dover says there are also delays on the French border. They're working closely with authorities there to clear those queues. A 17-year-old boy from Lancashire has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman was found dead on a beach in Bournemouth last night. Dorset police saying they were called to reports of two women stabbed on Durley Chine Beach at around 11:45 p.m. A 34-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. A 38-year-old was taken to hospital with serious injuries. President Putin is reportedly ready to pause his invasion of Ukraine with a negotiated ceasefire that would recognise current battlefield lines. According to sources, the Russian president has grown frustrated by what he sees as Western attempts to derail possible negotiations. Asked about the report during a visit to Belarus yesterday, Putin said talks should resume and negotiations should be based on, quote, the realities on the ground. Ukraine's President Zelensky, though, has previously said that peace, according to Putin's terms, is impossible. And finally, one of the most popular US presidents is getting the Hollywood treatment as the actor Dennis Quaid puts his spin on Ronald Reagan.
What would you say is the issue of our time? No question about it. Communism and the Soviet Union. Get in the game. Run for office.
The first trailer for a new movie about the 40th president has been released. It tells the story of President Reagan's life from confronting childhood bullies to becoming a Hollywood star and then taking his place in the Oval Office. The cast also includes Penelope Ann Miller as First Lady Nancy Reagan and Leslie Ann Down as Margaret Thatcher. For the latest stories, you can sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to the Saturday 5.
Thanks, Ray. It's Saturday night, and you're with the Saturday Five. I'm Darren Grimes, and in a world where Manchester United can win the FA Cup, truly anything can happen. So maybe Albion and Corner can come up with a cogent argument for once. Just maybe. Just maybe.
Miracles.
But we're going to crack on now with tonight's First Debate. Who's going first?
Yeah, I think that's me, Darren. So, is Nigel Farage a cop-out? Well, myself, like many of you who really like Nigel's policies and what he stands for, have been really disappointed to see that he has said he is ruling out standing in the general election. Well, what's he going to do instead? Well, he's going to fly off to go and support Donald Trump because he says that's more important in this day and age. Well, frankly, Nigel, I have to say, I'm really disappointed. And if you are a patriot, at a time when you think that you can finish off the Tories, you should be standing, you will give Reform a massive poll boost, and you'll really hammer the nail into the Tories. So why not now? Why not do it now? And I'll put it to the rest of the panel. Do you think Nigel Farage is a cop-out, Darren?
I wouldn't call him a cop-out because he is spending the next 6 weeks campaigning for reform. So you could argue that all he's done is remove his chance of becoming an MP.
But do you not think, though, that if he really believes what he says, he should put his money where his mouth is?
In the sense of stand for election himself?
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue that, yes.
Well, what else can you argue? I think Nigel's a realist. And ultimately, if he stood to be a Reform candidate, he wasn't really going to have a real chance of becoming an MP because the first past the post system that we operate in this country, it's very hard for challenger parties to come up. Now, Nigel Farage is a big media figure. It would have been humiliating for him not to win a seat as an MP, I think. So I think he's done the realistic thing. He has kept his powder dry and he's decided to go off to the US. Now, how that marries with his whole shtick about being patriotic and how this is such an important general election, it doesn't really marry up. But, objectively speaking, is the US general election more important globally than the UK general election? Yeah, it is.
But is he going to hand the Tories some extra votes now? Will people go away from Reform and say, actually, I'm going to vote for the Conservative Party?
I'm not complaining.
And it does say, let's save Britain behind him, right, at this Reform rally. And if you do genuinely think Britain is in need of saving, then there is an argument there that you would, well, attempt to save it, would you not?
Absolutely, and I also think that Nigel Farage's impact on the American election will be negligible if
well, apparently he's been offered a job, right, if President Trump wins.
But Trump doesn't need him to win. I think Nigel Farage has possibly made this balance on a personal level that this will be more beneficial for him. And I agree with you that whatever you think of him and his policies, I think he rose through British politics. He's British. He probably cares the most about Britain, you would think. And I think that if you're that person in that position, you ought to be putting that first as a politician, and that's clearly not what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gutted. I'm personally gutted because I do believe people who go into politics should put their money where their mouth is, and they shouldn't complain if they're not going to do what they expect other people to do. And I find it really difficult now. I mean, I was somebody who was possibly going to vote for Reform if Nigel came back, and now he's not. My vote's gone. Benjamin, what do you think?
I mean, I think he's put money before the country. You know, he has referred to before the last week and in the last week about how he has this big job offer in the US, probably very well paid. There's an enormous amount of money in US politics, and he's chosen that. But there's also part of his story that I don't think adds up, because he said that he was going to launch a campaign to be an MP next week, and they got wind of it. Well, Ben Habib, deputy leader of Reform, said, I knew nothing about that. And how odd that if you had a planned putting yourself forward just in a week, that you would suddenly drop that. I think the truth is that he doesn't want his pride to be hurt by the fact that he would almost certainly lose. But I'm sorry, I don't respect him for that. I think that shows a lack of principle.
That he stood for Parliament like 7 times.
And lost.
Yes, but...
So he doesn't want to lose again, so he wants to save face.
Well, he did it 7 times. He must be a sucker for punishment.
Why do an 8th time? Is there not an argument to argue in defence of Nigel? Is there not an argument to say... I am Nigel Farage. I'm going to go to the United States of America to work with my friend Donald Trump and try and get a UK-US trade deal for Britain that we really need to succeed in a post-Brexit Britain? Is there not an argument that he wants to make sure that relations between the UK and the US stay good when there's a Trump presidency and a potential Keir Starmer prime minister?
But that's the point, right? I mean, why would he do any favours for Keir Starmer? Because Keir Starmer is going to say...
It's favours for the country. It's favours for the country.
Well, you can make that argument, right? But Keir Starmer will herald it as, you know, British civil servants doing all the hard work. Yes, maybe Nigel Farage has put a connection together, but he's not the guy doing it. It's the Labour government.
Nigel can say, I did it. And they couldn't have done it without me.
Well, they can have that debate, but I think Keir Starmer will come off looking better. He'll go, well, Labour achieved what the Tories couldn't. And I mean, that will be far more damning for the country.
I think what it shows is that reform is not a serious political operation. They're not organised, they don't have candidates, they don't have money. And Nigel Farage knows all of those things. He knows it's a busted flush before it even happens. And I think that you're going to see the bubble of excitement around Reform UK really amount to very little. I think they'll do much worse than people have said.
So would you welcome... So let's say Reform are finished after this election, right? Let's say they're over. Would you welcome Nigel Farage into the Conservative Party, and do you think your peers would?
Personally, no, I wouldn't, because I don't think it is appropriate to have someone in the Conservative Party who has campaigned against the Conservative Party for the last 30 years, really since he was in the referendum party back when Jimmy Goldsmith was running it. So, no, I wouldn't personally welcome him into the party. I know there are other Conservatives that would. I just don't know why everyone chickens out and says, well, no, I wouldn't welcome him in the party. It's no better than having Natalie Elphicke in the Labour Party. Why do you want people who have opposed you in your party?
Well, I would just make the point that I think Nigel is a true Conservative in the sense that he is low tax, he's all about freedom of speech, he's about growth, and basically a patriot as well. And I think that the Tory party have lost a lot of that identity over the last 20 years and do need those people from Reform that are really Conservatives to come back.
The Conservatives are Conservatives. There are plenty of Conservatives.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I think there's a lot more that are not as Conservative as Reform are. And I think if you're going
I'm
to be
not as Conservative as Reform.
No, but if you're going to... Rishi Sunak comes out and says, we're a broad church. If you're going to be a broad church, like, the Labour Party are, then you should have...
And we do have him to thank for Brexit getting over the line, because it was your party that was not getting that done.
Sorry, who got Brexit done?
Boris got Brexit only because of Nigel and
the Conservatives got Brexit
done. Because of Nigel and
Boris Johnson got Brexit done.
Even you
David Cameron called the referendum.
Yeah, but you know why David Cameron called that referendum.
All right, Albie, since you like the sound of your own mouth so much, why don't you go next?
It's sound of my own voice, Darren. And you're right, it does sound very good. Let's cast our minds back to the very first episode of the Saturday 5 last March. In my opening monologue for this brilliant show, I said it was still possible for Rishi Sunak to win the next general election. And lots of things have changed since then. But I'm here to say that the next general election is going to be closer than we think. Yes, we've all seen the polls. Labour's set for a landslide, a 20-plus point poll lead. But if we look at the empirical data on the ground, what we saw in the local elections would actually point to a poll lead of much closer to around 10% than 20%. And that would indicate to me that the next general election, which is going to be held on the 4th of July, is going to be closer than we think, because it would require a swing from the Conservatives to Labour bigger than 1997 in order for Keir Starmer to win a decent majority. So it's still all to play for. The general election is going to be closer than we think. Benjamin, the Labour Party are quite bullish on winning the next election. A little bit cocky, I think, in my opinion. Well, what do you think of my assessment?
It's so good to have you on the show when there are so many vacant safe seats around the country that you could be going for. So, thank you for joining us at this important time in your career. Look, the fact is, there's no evidence that the Tories are going to get back in. Professor Sir John Curtis, the oracle of polling, gives a 99% chance that Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister. This is the biggest lead that a party has had for so long since World War II. The fact is that, for example, you could take Theresa May's election, where she was about 20 points ahead of Corbyn, and clearly that collapsed. But what you've seen here is that Labour's poll lead has basically not shifted an inch since Liz Truss was Prime Minister. And it's very reliable. And if you look at the local elections, those numbers didn't include Scotland, for example, which is actually seeing a pretty rapid shift towards the Labour Party. And so I actually think that you're doing a disservice to the Tories, because the sensible thing for Tories to do would be to go go to those seats with 15,000 majorities that maybe they could save. If you're trying to save seats that were won last time, you've not got a hope in hell.
I don't think you listened to what I said. I said the next general election is going to be closer than we think. And I would caution against being so cocky as to think
it's
that
not
Labour's
cocky
going to win this landslide, when actually...
Well, you just called Nigel Farage a realist. I think a realist is the Tories are going to have a terrible result, and you are deluding yourself.
I'm not
And the problem is that people like you haven't been listening to what people have been saying for the last few years. The reason there's still a 20-point lead is because you keep telling yourselves that the Tories are wonderful and everything is fine. Rishi Sunak keeps going out saying, look, everything's great, as people can't even afford to eat. Maybe you started listening, then you might have a fighting chance.
The empirical evidence that we have seen in the local elections would suggest that the general election is going to be closer than the polls would suggest. And what I would say is, I would just caution against being as complacent as to think that there's going to be this landslide victory, because Keir Starmer himself said that he would be willing to work with the Liberal Democrats in a coalition. So it's clearly on your leader's mind as well. Georgia, what do you make of this?
Just speaking anecdotally, seeing as you referred a lot to empirical evidence, I think there is very low enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. And that is the reason why it could be closer than we expect. But I still think that the hatred of the Conservative Party at this point in time outweighs how much people despise Labour for what they've previously done.
But I mean, the turnaround from Mrs May to Boris Johnson, I know that was two years, well, she had a 2017 to 2019 Parliament, but he didn't have that long to turn things around, and he did manage to turn the brand around in quite a pretty impressive way. And the polls weren't totally correct then. The polls weren't right in 2016. So I wouldn't say I'm as deluded as Albie is on this.
What is delusional about saying that it's going to be closer than we think?
Well, maybe
you both disagreed with me.
Maybe let me make a couple of points in favour of what you're saying, because I think, you know, there certainly isn't an enthusiasm for Labour. I think that the country is going to this election not knowing really who they want to vote for, because I don't think they're inspired by either party. The people who are going to vote Conservative and come out and vote will be doing so because they would not, they hate the idea of the Labour Party being in government for 5-10 years. I think they would hate that, a lot of Conservatives. And I do think, though, on the opposing point, that you're up against really, really tough times. You've got reform scratching on your door that's going to really kill you in those safe seats. You've also got an SNP in resurgence, which has kept Labour at bay in other elections where they would have helped Labour win majorities. So I do think that you're going to have a lot more of a difficult time than perhaps is showing in the local elections. And I'd also say, you know, even as Rishi Sunak said himself, a local election is not reflective of a general election.
The election is going to be tough. Make no doubt about that at all. The election is going to be tough for the Conservatives. But I think the earlier conversation we're having about Nigel not standing in the general election is actually a huge benefit to the Conservatives. Then you also have the apathy about Keir Starmer. OK, people hate the Tories, but they don't exactly love Keir Starmer, so they might stay at home rather than vote for someone, which will still lead to a Labour landslide, potentially. But it doesn't necessarily mean people are voting for Keir. They're just not voting for the Tories and perhaps...
But that's how it always worked. If you look at the history books, actually a lot of these same arguments were made about Tony Blair in 1997. He was referred to as not very popular, as quite boring. He was called Bambi Blair. So... And if you go back further than that, you go to Margaret Thatcher. She was not remotely radical when she was going for her first general election. She was extremely cautious, nothing like the Thatcher that governed. And so actually what Keir Starmer is doing is typically what these leaders have done to get into power.
I think there was a lot more enthusiasm for Tony Blair in 97 than there is for Starmer now.
But I bet you 10 quid that there will be a bigger... Well, you know, I don't have your kind of private school money, but I bet you that there will be a bigger swing under Keir Starmer than there was under Tony Blair in 1997.
But that's just going to be due to apathy, I think. I think that's just going to be
no, it'll be the biggest swing in modern political history.
But that's because you're not going to get those Tory voters coming out and backing the Conservatives, because you're always going to get true blue Tories that are just not going to bother to vote. I know there's possibly some in my own family who's saying, I'm just not going to vote because I don't know who to vote for. I think with Tony Blair, you saw a population of people who were inspired to vote for somebody based on his vision for Britain. Keir Starmer's vision for Britain doesn't exist. It's just we're not the Tories.
But Benjamin's right to say that the Scottish question is interesting because, of course, the question of Scotland for so long, at least in the 21st century, has been the SNP dominant.
Yes.
Now that's not a factor anymore. Boris isn't the leader of the Tories. It's not going to be easy, but I just think it's going to be closer than the polls are suggesting.
Well, I mean, the SNP aren't as low as the Conservatives in the polls in Scotland.
Well, no, of course, but Tories have never really been
No, I mean, if you consider it nationwide, they're doing better in Scotland than the... So I don't think the SNP are doing as bad as you think, to be honest. But right, still ahead, Labour apparently want to change the voting age. Are they right? Plus, is it time to ban smartphones in schools? But next, a group of Jews and their allies gathered in Finchley this week to ensure a film about the 7th of October massacre by Hamas was aired. All power to them, I say. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones is a first-language Welsh speaker and joins us now. Gareth, I mean, a lot of people will be thinking, hang on, this guy is a Welsh teacher. He speaks English. He knew what was on the parking ticket. He's just trying to make a point. He's being a prat, isn't he?
No, hey, come on, mate. I'm a first language Welsh. It's important that we watch after our language and, you know, that everything's bilingual. For us in Wales, you wouldn't go to France and expect your ticket to be in English, would you? You know, English is the most spoken language, but let's watch after these small languages. It's part of our cultural. So, you know, I take my hat off to the guy. Fair play to him for go out and to fight this. But what it's done is put it onto the mainstream media, and you're talking about it, even that you're calling him a that. You know, at least we're having a discussion about it, and it's putting the Welsh language in the forefront. And, so, you know, Gareth, speaking Welsh is important.
Yeah, so Gareth, this is a matter of principle. Is there a sense that the Welsh language is being eradicated in Wales? Is this something that the Welsh people need to rise up against?
Well, Welsh government are trying to, you know, bring a lot more Welsh speaking into our daily life and teach people how to speak Welsh. Well, everything should be bilingual then. And I think, you know, it should start with government. So government should be putting pressure on these companies to make sure everything is bilingual. So I get behind this guy. Fair play to him. It's a good stance, and it puts it in the public eye. Let's have everything in both languages, especially Welsh, because that's my first language. And I'm not
if I was Welsh, if I were Welsh, I think I would agree with you. I think I would agree with you, Gareth.
It depends if you come from Wrexham.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very warm welcome back to the Saturday 5. As always, thank you very much for your emails and messages about tonight's topics. Ali says, Benjamin is right.
What? What?
All the Reform team have jumped ship. Up to them, but don't want to hear them preach anymore. Well, I mean, I imagine Ben Habib would argue that he hasn't jumped ship. Richard Tice, our very own former Belinda de Lucy, she may argue too. But John says, after the shenanigans of Trump and his alleged support for withholding funding for Ukraine, Farage appears to be siding with the wrong side. Well, viewers will have some thoughts on that, I'm sure. Thank you for those opinions. Now, though, it's time for our next debate. I'm going to go next. I've decided I'm putting my foot down. I was honestly genuinely quite heartened by these scenes, right, where you've got this cinema in Finchley in London. It's called the Phoenix Cinema. And they had an act of defiance against censorship. And the Jewish community there, there's quite a large Jewish community there, stood against threats and intimidation. Now, I've been pretty depressed since October 7th, to be honest, so seeing Jews and their allies rally at the Phoenix Cinema to actually defend a film shown about Hamas's massacre on October 7th, the Nova Music Festival in particular, despite a pro-Palestine mob demanding it be cancelled, going as far as to vandalise the cinema itself. These people draped themselves in Israeli flags, but they also stood, by the way, with the British flag. You don't see that much on the pro-Hamas marches, do you? They boldly stood up to a new wave of anti-Semitism and cancel culture, actually echoing, I think, the spirit of those who stood against fascism in the 1930s. And that's what I think this is. I think this is fascism, and we need to stand up against it. Free expression shouldn't be silenced, and I think maybe, just maybe, there are people left in this country willing to stand for truth and for Britain.
Free expression shouldn't be silenced, but you also want to ban the pro-Palestine marches, don't you?
They're free to. They've said since October 7th, Albie, they've ranted about how much they want jihad and intifada. I think they've had enough.
You want to ban protests.
Ban the protests, but they can say whatever they want.
But you say that free expression should be allowed. Tell me, how does that make sense?
It makes sense because they are spreading poison and extremism on the streets of London. Have free speech, but you do not get to call for jihad and intifada on the streets of Britain.
The vast majority of the tens of thousands of protesters who go out and protest in absolute disgust at what is going on in Gaza, the hardship that people are facing, are not calling for intifada, and they are not Hamas supporters. They just want peace. And what I really dislike, Darren, is when people like you say, oh, pro-Hamas marches, hate marches. These people want peace. That's what they want. I was in Oxford last weekend for my sister's graduation, and I saw the tents who were camped out my sister's college.
Oh, and you said how brave, how brave, how noble.
At first, I thought, you know, this is so stupid. These people are so annoying. What are they even doing? But then I thought about the conditions of people in Gaza at the moment who are living in tents in much worse conditions than outside of an Oxford college. And I thought, you know what, actually, these protests are for something. And it's not just something we debate on television. There are people starving and dying of exposure in Gaza because of what is going on. And it is perfectly reasonable for people to protest in their disgust about that. As well as it's reasonable for people to want the hostages to be released.
Look, at the end of the day, the problem with these protests, when you go to somewhere like East Finchley, where there's a large Jewish community, it's a deliberate act to intimidate the local Jewish community. And I know that there was a film being shown specifically in that cinema, but that's not the point. You should, if you care about peace and you care about freedom of speech and your right to protest, surely going to protest against someone else's freedom of speech is completely counterintuitive.
And I also think you ought to be ashamed of yourself, actually, for standing on the side of those who want to censor a film because it shows the facts about a massacre in which young...
I didn't mention the film in my argument at all.
Can you let someone else speak, Albie?
You're putting words into my mouth.
Be accurate. You did not want them to watch a film. You wanted a film to be censored. You support these people.
I don't support them.
You just said, oh, how brave,
no. That's not what I said. You're making things up. Darren, have you taken acid or something? Are you seeing and hearing things? That is not what I said. And I was talking about the protests in general. Well, be accurate then. Be accurate.
Will you let me finish a point? Or shall we all just call it a day right now? Go home.
Be accurate.
You support those who want to silence a film showing young Jewish people being massacred at a music festival, and you side with people that do that. That's not progressive. That's not liberal. You are putting yourself on the wrong side of history. You are making things up.
Look,
no,
you
should be ashamed.
I actually have some sympathy with them because, you know, their beloved Iranian president has just died. You know, they had to swap calling for intifada to start calling interflora so they could get the reef. You know, these people have had a tough week, right? You'd have some sympathy with them. You know, in seriousness, I actually think what's happened here is really helpful because it wouldn't be acceptable just to protest a Jewish film festival, that wouldn't be OK either. But this was a film about the massacre. And yet they still wanted to stop it and were aggressive and were trying to prevent the Jewish community going about their lives. So we should be grateful that they showed us who they are. This isn't about Palestine. This is about an anti-Semitism that says that those Jewish people in the area that is basically their own community, where most Jews live in London, that they can't record the events of their own people being massacred.
Absolutely
They have shown us who they are, and it is deeply bigoted.
Georgia, I also applaud the cinema actually for not kowtowing into saying, well, it's just safer for us to remove the film.
Absolutely. I think often nowadays too many companies kind of buckle at the first sign of disagreement from the public. So really brave for the cinema to carry on and show the film. And I think what we're missing here is that among the protesters, there's obviously diversity, as you're saying, Gal, but I think in this instance, if you're graffitiing and trying to intimidate a cinema because they're showing evidence of a terrorist attack, which was brutal and disgusting, I think you're not pro-Palestinian, you're not pro-human, you're just anti-Israel and anti the Jewish people, which is unacceptable.
You know what my major concern with all of this is that there's been such a lack of crackdown of certain... I mean, again, there's, like Albie said, there is peaceful people in these protests, but there's been a lack of response from the Metropolitan Police and our security services that has allowed this to breed even further than it should have been allowed. And so you've given rise to these more extremist people to say, why don't we just show up at East Finchley? Let's go and intimidate the local Jewish people. Imagine if the EDL went to somewhere in East London, like Southall, and said, you know what, we're just going to go march up and down the streets
in West London.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. And that would be deemed massively inappropriate, and the Met Police would be there in minutes getting them all out of the city.
All right, folks, still ahead. Annunciata Rees-Mogg will be joining us to tell us what she thinks of calls to bring back Boris. And we'll ask if it's time to ban smartphones in schools. But next, should 16-year-old kids who could potentially, well, still be at school, you have to be in training or at school until you're 18, should they get the vote? That's one of the changes which could occur under a Labour government. We'll debate that next. You're with us Saturday 5, live on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Over the next 24 hours, it turns increasingly unsettled. We'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain across the country, and that's all thanks to low pressure, which is going to dominate the rest of the bank holiday weekend, bringing areas of rain and heavy and thundery showers as well. We've already got rain this evening pushing in from the southwest. This will continue to drift northwards as we head into the early hours. Rain across eastern areas also continuing to push northwards into parts of Scotland. Some of this will be heavy at times, but with a lot more cloud around, it will be generally quite mild overnight, temperatures remaining in double figures, but it does mean generally a grey, damp start across the UK Sunday morning with outbreaks of rain. However, northern Scotland, there will be some sunny spells first thing in the morning before cloud and rain pushes northwards from the south. As you can see across southern Scotland into Northern Ireland, a cloudy start, outbreaks of rain, but temperatures in double figures. Cloudy across the central swathe of England and Wales, but some brighter skies already pushing into southern parts of England and Wales there, and they will continue to push northwards as we move through the morning. However, as the temperatures start to rise, we'll see the clouds bubble up and we'll see heavy showers across much of England and Wales and southern parts of Scotland as we move through into the afternoon. Some rumbles of thunder possible, local disruption, generally staying cloudier for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland here with outbreaks of rain. A little cooler for most, temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, feeling a little warmer in the southeast compared to Saturday. On Monday, another day of sunny spells and showers for many. Some of these will be heavy at times, some longer spells of rain possible as well for parts of Scotland, and it stays unsettled Tuesday into Wednesday with further spells of rain in places. Temperatures near average.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. No murders committed during the break. Now, emails and messages have come in. Brendan says, the pro-Palestine marches every weekend are costing millions. They're on the streets more than football matches, so, like football clubs, they should be made to contribute. I think that's
They pay their taxes.
Oh, for God's sake. Not enough. They're probably all on bloody benefits. Carl says, sorry, Albie, if all they want is peace, why not call for Hamas to surrender? If all they want is peace, these protesters wouldn't care who downed weapons. Now, though, it's time for our next debate. I wonder who might make their debut.
So, Sir Keir Starmer has finally admitted what many people expected he was going to announce, that Labour are strongly considering legalising 16 and 17-year-olds voting in general elections. Personally, I think this is a very ridiculous decision. I think that 16 and 17-year-olds are, children. Most of them will still be at school or sixth form nowadays. They're not full adult citizens, and therefore they should not have the right to vote in general elections. And I also think it's bizarre that we have, supermarkets who won't sell teenagers paracetamol and scissors, but we think that they have a right to vote.
Can I say, I'm in favour of this policy if 16 and 17-year-olds are given the same legal rules as an 18-year-old is. And I'm just going to read some of the rules that would apply to them. They can gamble, drink, smoke, get tattoos, be sentenced to adult prison, be sentenced in an adult court, be deployed to war zones, lose all their homelessness benefits that they get, gain full guardianship, so the parents will have all of their guardianship taken off of them, be allowed to work over 4 hours with no break. All these things that come with being an adult, which is part of the franchise of being an adult in this country when you get the right to vote. If you want to give 16-year-olds the right to vote, then tell parents that's what comes with it, because that is the responsibility of voting in this country.
All right, before we bring in Sir Keir Starmer's spokesperson for GB News, can I play this clip of Sir Keir Starmer talking about the policy?
We want to see 16 and 17-year-olds voting. They can go out and work. They can serve in our armed forces. And, of course, if they are out and working, they pay tax. And therefore they should have a say over how the money they're paying in is being used. So yes, I want to see that vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. If you can work, you can pay tax, if you can serve in your armed forces, then you ought to be able to vote.
So, Benjamin, I think the question that I would want answered from that is, at any age, actually, the Treasury doesn't discriminate, right? If you're working as a 12-year-old, I don't know why you would be, but if you were, that I worked when I was 15. You can work.
I did work when I was 15. You can.
And you can. You can pay the Treasury whatever you want, right? That they don't discriminate in that sense. So he's wrong on that point. But also, secondly, on the serving in the armed forces. Well, you can't go to war because the UN say that actually sending children, they define 16-year-olds as children, to war is against a convention. So does that not suggest that actually Sir Keir Starmer's making points that simply don't stand up?
Well, no, because you can join the armed forces at 16. As a country, we say that you are capable of committing to the armed forces, to putting your life on the line a bit further down the line, to signing up to that role. So if the state thinks that you're good enough to train to fight for your country, and the state thinks that you are able to legally be a parent, which is about the biggest responsibility a person can take on, the state is having a big impact on those 16-year-olds' lives. It has a lot of power over them, and yet they have no power over the way the state acts towards them. And so actually I think it's not an unreasonable principle to say that if you can be a parent and you can join the armed forces, then you ought to have a vote. I think that's quite reasonable because that's having a much bigger impact on your life than lots of other people, in fact.
But there's a lot of red tape around those things, right? So you can join the armed forces, but you can't be deployed, right? So starting training into the armed forces is very different to walking into a war zone.
What's the red tape around being a parent at 16?
Yeah, I don't know whether you're involving red tape in it, but, you know...
Well, frankly, I mean, it's quite rare for someone to have a child at 16. It's very rare, actually. I don't know what... It does happen, but it's rare. But the only reason that it is at 16 is because they know that children, well, 16-year-olds have sex, right? So let's just be honest. It's not because they want to be some grandstanding. It's because they know that people at 15 and 16 years old start having sexual relations. So at that point, you might as well say, well, we don't want to call these people...
The law... At my school, they were doing it a lot of younger people.
Exactly. The law... Hang on a second, let me just finish my point. Because the point is that 16 on having children is different because you're just being sensible with that policy. Everything else, you're classed as a child legally.
But hang on.
So would you be comfortable removing all those child-related laws that protect kids?
Well, we're not talking about that.
No, but would you do that?
Can I just say...
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't.
Be an adult, then?
No, I wouldn't, but I would still be in favour of votes at 16, actually. Because I think extending the franchise of voting to younger people and making that a more core part of the lives of British children when they're in later school life will make them better democratic citizens when they're older and actually counter this huge problem of voter apathy that we have with younger voters. And it might actually get parties like the Conservative Party, which does not do enough to appeal to younger voters. We can all agree they are rubbish when it comes to attracting younger voters. I say that as a young Tory. I'm trying to make it better for younger voters. But I think if parties had to appeal to a younger part of the electorate, 16 and 17, catch them when they're at school, it's going to make them more...
I think opening it up to teenagers doesn't necessarily mean that they'll change...
18 as a teenager.
In terms of people being adults, I just don't think having more years of people able to vote will necessarily make them think more about young people because we already have plenty of young people voting who are legal adults. I also think that the common retort to this is to say that Labour are kind of trying to gerrymander and trying to get young people to vote for them more. I think that is at play in this decision, though I also think that young people, as you're saying, they tend to be quite apathetic anyway.
Yeah.
But I just think that...
But I don't think it's a good enough argument to say that you shouldn't extend the franchise because they might vote in a certain way. That is a very slippery slope. And that is the exact argument that they put against women having the franchise, because they said, oh, all the women are going to go and vote one way and then that'll overwhelm the men. Well, I don't think that's a good enough reason to oppose extending the franchise.
Go on, expand on that.
No, that's not my argument. I'm not saying this. I think that both main parties in the UK need to do a better job of appealing to young people, and I couldn't care less, really, whether it means that they'll vote for the Conservatives or Labour. Personally, I won't be voting for either of them because I don't think they do enough for the country or for young people.
Well, I campaigned for votes at 16 when I was 16 years old. I was part of the UK Youth
Parliament.
Well, it was a while ago, you're right, yeah. And I was part of the UK Youth Parliament, and I really believe that I should have a say. But let me just be clear to the audience at home. I was a Labour-supporting young person. I listened to what anyone else around told me about politics rather than was conscious enough to make my own political decisions.
I did vote Tory at 16.
Well, that's absolutely fine. Good for you. But most young people are highly impressionable at that age. They still face peer pressure at 16 years old. Half of them haven't even passed the GCSEs or done A-levels yet. And we're now expecting them to make decisions, conscious decisions about the future of the country. They haven't paid a tax. Most of them live at home with their parents. It's ridiculous.
I just point out that Scotland and Wales already has votes at 16.
Yeah,
so some of the countries...
Look how well it's working out for them.
Well, that's very condescending.
Right. Still to come tonight, myself and Albie will go head-to-head on net zero targets in the Saturday Scrap, and Annunciata Rees-Mogg will tell us what she thinks of calls to bring back Boris in this election. But next, some MPs say kids are spending far too much time on smartphones and that they should be banned in schools. Are they right? You're with the Saturday 5, live on GB News.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
2,000 football banning orders have been issued to England fans ahead of this summer's Euro 2024 tournament in Germany. But authorities think that more than 300,000 England supporters could go to Germany, with Scotland fans, of course, also expected to travel in huge numbers. Well, I'm joined now by GB News' home and security editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. So you went to a press briefing this morning. As I understand, the authorities are gearing up to tackle what they see as a huge wave of potential hooliganism at the tournament. What's the latest?
Well, they're certainly not saying they're expecting hooliganism, and they are preparing for the worst, of course, if it happens, but hoping for the best. They say that in recent tournaments, England fans and, of course, Scotland fans have been pretty well behaved, but there will be very significant numbers attending that tournament, which gets underway in just over 5 weeks' time. That first match is Scotland taking on Germany in Munich, and of course, just 2 days later, it's England against Serbia near Dortmund. So 300,000 England fans alone they're expecting, because it's so accessible. I spoke earlier to Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who is the national lead for football policing. This is what he told me.
Positive, you know, England fans got a great record at recent tournaments. We know when any number of that people travel, there's always potential for issues, but I think the German authorities are really well prepared. And I think one of the positives, particularly thinking about our fans, Germany's a beer drinking culture, so the police are well aware of dealing with people in the nighttime economy. They deal with plenty of big festivals, so I think we're going to a place that is well suited to work with us to keep everyone safe and make sure there's no issues.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Thank you very much for your messages. Glenn says, Starmer is talking about giving 16-year-olds a vote in general elections. I say any major change to our democratic system needs the consent of the people. Therefore, it must be decided by a referendum. Margaret says if young people tended to vote Conservative, Starmer wouldn't dream of insisting that they have the vote. Quite the contrary. He'd fight it. I think there's a point there. Helen says, well done, Benjamin. I'm beginning to listen to you. Keep it up. By the time you're 50, you may have my full attention.
Not long.
Yeah, not long to go.
Just a year to wait, Helen. Now, though, it's time for our next debate. And, well, speaking of, Benjamin.
Yeah, let's hope I can still keep your attention, Helen. So, a cross-party group of MPs is calling for schools to have a statutory ban so that you can't have a smartphone in the classroom, in the school building, until 16 years old. They also want to change the age at which someone can get a social media profile like Twitter or Instagram or TikTok to say that you have to be 16 years old to open one. At the moment, it's 13. Now, I think that the arguments they put forward, that there are lots of dangers like pornography and bullying that are affecting young people, are valid. But I think it would be a mistake for our schools to say that there should be no smartphones, because it's not dealing with the reality of life that we do an ever-increasing number of basic tasks in the workplace through our mobile phones. I think schools should embrace mobile phones and smartphones and teach young people to know how to live with them in a responsible way.
Nonsense.
What do you think?
Nonsense, that's what I think. I mean, when I was at school and when you were at school, we would get told off if we got our phones out. I mean, you're basically saying,
didn't have a phone.
We should embrace smartphones in schools. No, we shouldn't. Schools should be a place for learning. It should be a space for social interaction between students. It should be a space for social interaction between students and teachers. That is what school is about. Smartphones shouldn't be in school. Actually, I think the ban on smartphones should go much further. I don't think 16-year-olds should have smartphones. Under 16s should have smartphones at all. I'm with Miriam Cates on that.
You know, earlier today on Saturday Morning Live, we were discussing the stats on 3 to 4-year-olds, and, you know, a quarter of them have smartphones. Like, their parents are just handing them these devices. One, I think that's neglect on the parents' part.
It's why we need
doing
rules
that
like
to the
this.
child. So, yeah, I agree. I think, actually, that proves that some parents are just saying, well, to hell with it, it keeps them quiet, get on with it. And that's why we need the state, dare I say, to say, well, at school, no, you can't do that.
The reality is you can't enforce that. A parent can go to a shop and buy a phone. They don't ask who's the phone for when you buy it. That's just not how capitalism works. You're entitled to go and buy a phone at any age above, well, at any age at all at the moment, I believe. So how are you going to enforce that? You're going to have police officers going around checking if children are using smartphones. It's impossible to control. First of all, I don't know how this law would work. In principle, it's a fallacy to say that this would be an enforceable law. Maybe the intention is good.
Social media would be enforceable, though, if you had to have ID.
But then you're moving down a slippery slope of saying, well, everyone who's on social media, we want to track what you're saying and who you're talking to.
Well, they already do.
Well, maybe they do. But my point would be that it would be far worse to have that system in place than to say to parents, you're responsible. I'd make the final point because in Benjamin's defence, you can actually set up profiles on smart devices that only allow access to certain things when you're in a location. So what I would suggest we do is build the technology to turn on educational features when you walk into a school. So it only is then, as they do in China, everything in TikTok is educational for their children, and that's giving them an edge.
Well, I didn't have on my bingo card you endorsing communist China.
Well, they're getting some things right.
I think the reality is that phones and the ways in which we use them are such a massive and inescapable part of our lives that I think it is just a bit deluded and a bit unconstructive to take that out of the classroom when in reality, when they leave school, when they go into the real world, it is going to be a massive part of their life, whether that is the problems like, you know, bullying or abuse and those kind of things, or the many things for which smartphones are helpful for and social media are helpful for. I think we're doing the next generation a better job to get them to know how to use these things safely than to pretend they don't exist when they obviously do.
But I mean, the rise in, I'll put this to Georgia, the rise in things like gender dysphoria, for example, where when I left school in 2009, the increases in the
and the rest
%, not the 100, and it was 2009, I promise. And I think that in large part is down to apps like TikTok and people sitting on their smartphones. Do these problems not suggest that actually the state needs to intervene in some way?
Yeah, I think there are lots of issues online that talk about some elements of the trans community and eating disorders, for example, that's a big one. I've had targeted content about that, just being a young woman, and also plastic surgery. I think that the thing with this is that there's a balance to be had, and I think when it comes to children's access to these kinds of things, I think parents need to be more proactive. But I think having a kind of a blank check for a law to clamp down on everything to do with young people on the internet and young people in technology and smartphones, I think is the wrong decision. I don't necessarily trust the government in all of these circumstances to actually do the right thing.
Say no to nanny. Absolutely. We can't have this nanny state nonsense all the time. It's the same as the sugar tax. You've got to let people make decisions for themselves and for their children.
You just said we need to copy China.
Well, no, but I think what China's doing with sort of formulating this, saying we can't get rid of technology. It's going to be here. It's here to stay. We can't just say no to under 16s because they know it's an unenforceable policy. But
it's not unenforceable.
Of course,
like saying
are you going to put a police officer walking around to people's houses?
Well,
that's
like saying selling alcohol selling alcohol to under 18s is unenforceable.
Because parents don't buy themselves out, but buy their kids alcohol, Albie. Parents don't.
Children need protection from bad parents.
I would argue there are some parents that do that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But anyway, loads more to come on the show tonight. We're going to be answering your questions in Ask the Five. Get them in. And Nunziata Rees-Mogg is going to tell us whether the Tories should bring back Boris in this election. And I'll go head-to-head with Albie in the Saturday Scrap. First of all, though, we're going to get your latest weather with Greg.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Over the next 24 hours, it turns increasingly unsettled. We'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain across the country, and that's all thanks to low pressure, which is going to dominate the rest of the bank holiday weekend, bringing areas of rain and heavy and thundery showers as well. We've already got rain this evening pushing in from the southwest. This will continue to drift northwards as we head into the early hours. Rain across eastern areas also continuing to push northwards into parts of Scotland. Some of this will be heavy at times, but with a lot more cloud around, it will be generally quite mild overnight, temperatures remaining in double figures. But it does mean generally a grey, damp start across the UK Sunday morning with outbreaks of rain. However, northern Scotland, there will be some sunny spells first thing in the morning before cloud and rain pushes northwards from the south. As you can see, across southern Scotland into Northern Ireland, a cloudy start, outbreaks of rain, but temperatures in double figures. Cloudy across the central swathe of England and Wales, but some brighter skies already pushing into southern parts of England and Wales there, and they will continue to push northwards as we move through the morning. However, as the temperatures start to rise, we'll see the clouds bubble up and we'll see heavy showers across much of England and Wales and southern parts of Scotland as we move through into the afternoon. Some rumbles of thunder possible, local disruption, generally staying cloudier for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland here with outbreaks of rain. A little cooler for most, temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, feeling a little warmer in the southeast compared to Saturday. On Monday, another day of sunny spells and showers for many. Some of these will be heavy at times, some longer spells of rain possible as well for parts of Scotland, and it stays unsettled Tuesday into Wednesday with further spells of rain in places. Temperatures near average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking? Not lying, I never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocked me. This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The most sexiest man in the UK at the moment, as voted for by a dating website, is that man on your screen, Jeremy Clarkson. I'm sorry, Peter, I know he's a man of a certain age, but I'm not getting this one.
Are you not?
No.
This is another reason for an old wrinkly like me to be deeply joyous. Hope springs eternal. He's grey-haired, he's balding, he's got a bit of a pot belly, he's quite tall. You know, I reckon I might be in without a shower.
As long as only hope springing eternal, love. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of guys watching this will really be a bit befuddled as to how he's the sexiest guy. I think it's a sympathy vote.
No, I get it. I understand it.
But he's got a sense of humour, and he's got plenty of money.
But what's there to understand? How is he the sexiest man?
I'll tell you why. Because he's and I say this as a bloke, he's a man's man. He gets stuck in, he's involved, he's practical, he's physical.
Does that make him
funny,
sexy, though?
He's got money. I think men these days, if you ask me, too effeminate. And women don't want that. Women, well, I don't know what...
What do women want? Go on, just mansplain to me what women want. Go on,
sorry, tell us, Dawn.
Thank you very much. No, this is voted for by, it's an illicit dating website, OK?
Oh, is it an affairs website?
Married women. But Idris Elba came third.
I just think Jez he's a man's man. Like I said, he's physical, he gets involved, he likes a beer, he's got plenty of money. How much did he get for the farm on Amazon?
That's so silly. So you're implying women only go for men with money?
Well, no, but I mean...
He did, didn't he? Just said that, yeah. He's got plenty of money for sex.
It's normal for women to want to be with a man who can look after them, no?
No. Well, Stop mansplaining what women want.
My mum had an expression, Ben. She said, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. But trust me, if Idris Elba gets himself a pair of wellies, he'll be second next year.
It's Saturday night, and this is the Saturday Five. I'm Darren Grimes, along with Albie Amancorner, Georgia Gillily, Alex Armstrong and Benjamin Butterworth. Plenty more to come tonight, including Labour's plan to impose VAT on school fees and a good old-fashioned Saturday scrap between me and Albie over whether the Tories should ditch their net zero plans. Liz Truss says they should. It's 7 p.m, and this is the Saturday Five. So after this, still to come, we are about to ask the brilliant commentator and broadcaster Annunziata Rees-Mogg what she makes of Tory calls to bring back Boris in this election. Then we'll be answering your questions in Ask the Five. Please do send them through to gbnews.com/your say. But first of all, it's your Saturday Night News with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. And we start with some very sad breaking news. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed that an RAF pilot has died after a Spitfire crashed into a field in Lincolnshire. Describing it as a tragic accident, the incident took place near RAF Coningsby. Police and emergency services rushed to the scene just before 1:20 this afternoon. No one else is believed to have been involved in the incident. It's thought that the aircraft was taking part in a Battle of Britain memorial event. The pilot's family has been informed and an investigation is due to take place. Well, the Prime Minister is claiming that voters and their families would be at risk under a Labour government. Posting in a long thread on X, Rishi Sunak claimed that Labour doesn't have a plan and said that would give our enemies the chance to take advantage of our weakness. The Tories are trying to make security a key dividing line between themselves and Sir Keir Starmer's party after pledging to raise defence spending to 2.5% by 2030. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says the voting age should be lowered to 16. Both major parties have been pitching their messages to voters on this, the first weekend of the election campaign. Speaking to reporters, the Labour leader said young people deserve to have a say.
I want to see 16 and 17-year-olds voting. They can go out and work. They can serve in our armed forces. And, of course, if they are out and working, they pay tax. And, therefore, they should have a say over how the money they're paying in is being used. So, yes, I want to see that vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. If you can work, you can pay tax, if you can serve in your armed forces, then you ought to be able to vote.
78 Conservative MPs have now stepped down ahead of the summer election, which is a post-war record. It also surpasses the previous high, which took place prior to Tony Blair's victory in 1997. It comes as the Tories trail in the polls. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey says his party is ready for the new Parliament.
The Liberal Democrats have got a fantastic set of policies on the health service, on the economy and the environment. Today we're campaigning against the sewage problem, and we've led that campaign. I think overall we're just much more ambitious than some of the other parties, and critically we want to transform British politics. We think the politics in our country is broken, it needs to be changed, and we're the only party talking about that.
And finally, a 17-year-old boy from Lancashire has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman was found dead on a beach in Bournemouth last night. Dorset police said they were called to reports of two women stabbed on Durley Chine Beach at around 11:45 p.m. The 34-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. The 38-year-old was taken to hospital with serious injuries. Well, for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to the Saturday Five.
Thanks, Ray. It's Saturday night and you're with the Saturday Five. I'm Darren Grimes and I can promise that you're in for another very lively hour. We're going to crack on now with tonight's big interview. Now, as you may have noticed, the Tories aren't predicted to do well, especially well, at the upcoming general election. However, Dame Andrea Jenkyns thinks that a certain blonde-haired former Prime Minister might be able to change the course of events. And I mean, well, Liz Truss has her detractors, but maybe it's worth some thought. I'm just kidding. With plenty of seats vacant, Dame Andrea says the one and only Boris Johnson should stand in one of them. She says, and I quote, "We need him to help stop Sir Neilot, flip-flopping anti-Brexit, not knowing what a woman is Starmer, and Rayner from getting into power." Tell us what you really think, Andrea. Now, here to help us assess the merits of this plan is the former Brexit Party MEP and now a brilliant commentator, Annunciata Rees-Mogg. Annunciata, thank you very much for your company. I mean, where do you stand on this, Annunciata? Are you with Andrea Jenkyns? Do you think actually this could bring about a nice renaissance of Tory, values and frankly, support?
I think it would be absolutely ridiculous to bring Boris back to one seat at this time. However, does he have a part to play in an election campaign? Absolutely. We've got rather a charisma-free zone. I think Reform are calling this the immigration election. I'd call it the imitation election. Everyone seems to be trying to ape a former idea of Tony Blair or something very managerial and serious. And in fact, Boris brings a huge amount of life, and he reaches part of the Conservative Party that other Tories do not reach.
Yeah, I mean, so would you recommend then that Rishi Sunak at least offers an olive branch and says, come on, come with us, join the campaign team? Because the whispers are, Annunciata, is that Boris is going to spend most of his time abroad.
Absolutely, and that is Boris's prerogative. And given how he was ousted from the party, one can completely understand that he might not want to help them now. However, I think he is actually a patriot. I think he is very supportive of his party, and he is hugely loyal. That's one of the strengths he has always been known for, sometimes to his own detriment. And his party needs him right now, not in one seat, not running the campaign, but supporting in areas where his appeal cuts through and avoiding, like the plague, areas where he's deeply unpopular. He is like Marmite, so use him wisely, but that would be up to the local candidates to know and understand their electorates and where he might go down well and where he might not.
Yeah.
Annunciata, I saw some polling earlier on today which indicated that for Conservative voters, immigration really is the top issue. And there's one thing I've never quite understood about Brexit Party reform-type right-wingers and the attraction of Boris Johnson. Because under Boris Johnson, we saw taxes rise to the highest level since the end of the Second World War. We saw sky-high levels of immigration, 750,000 in 2022, ushered in by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, by the way. And he's a social liberal, whereas you're meant to be a social conservative. So what is the draw of Boris Johnson to people like you and Dame Andrea Jenkyns, who actually disagree with him on all of those things?
I'm not going to speak for Dame Andrea, but for myself, I'm not Boris's biggest fan. But it is undoubtedly true that there is a large proportion of the right-of-centre electorate that do find him an electable and an appealing character to have either as their leader or representing them in some way. And I think that has to be reflected that, yes, of course it is immigration that is very important to many people. But the only way we can achieve that is to leave the ECHR. Now, Labour are completely and utterly opposed to that. The Conservatives have looked into it and keep failing to do it because there are all sorts of blockades in the way. What we need is a reformed Conservative Party, depending who holds their seats, who loses. At the moment, we have no idea. But Boris could play a very important role in supporting those MPs who have the right-of-centre policies that actually win elections. And we saw that in 2019, that the new intake from the northern so-called red wall seats, the Midlands and further north, really did have pretty socially conservative, anti-mass immigration, low tax, small government views. And those are the voters that Boris appeals to. It's also very socially conservative when it comes to what is a woman, a question that Keir Starmer clearly still rather confused about. I'm pretty clear on it myself. But if Boris can bring some of those voters to the ballot box and get the right kind of MPs re-elected that represent those views that are not only popular with Conservative voters in 2019, but hugely popular in his own party, then he could really play an important role in this election.
But it's vibes, Annunziata. This is what I'm saying. Boris Johnson in 2019 proposed levelling up. That was a bigger state. All Boris Johnson said about immigration in 2019 is that he wanted it to be lower, when in fact he made it higher. Boris Johnson also had in the 29 manifesto that he wanted to get rid of LGBT conversion therapy. He's not this small state social conservative that you say he is. So I don't understand what the appeal is to getting him back into frontline right-wing politics when actually many people would say he's not a conservative.
One thing we haven't touched on is net zero, and Boris Johnson is clearly on the environmental side of the debate. However, he still gets votes from people who are not. And if he's not standing himself, but supporting Conservative candidates up and down the country who hold those views that are hugely popular with the British people, then he would play an important part.
So why shouldn't he stand in this election then, Annunziata? If he's a massive patriot and he, you know, would help the Conservatives, why not stand now?
The same reason as Nigel Farage shouldn't and isn't, that you end up, as I've actually discussed with Nigel in the past, focusing all your energy on trying to get elected in one seat, when what you actually need to do, when you're that sort of figurehead, you're that kind of big character, is to make sure you're getting votes as widely as possible for lots of people to be elected, not just yourself. Should he then be put in the Lords and made chairman of the party? That's another question.
So do you think he would win this election if he were the party leader today, if he were still Prime Minister? Do you think he'd beat Keir Starmer?
I don't think that had the Tories not manipulated, or the MPs in Westminster not manipulated the system to kick him out, that we'd be in this current situation.
Yes, I mean, Benjamin, you were delighted to see the back of him, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, you know, Boris Johnson is in the top 3 worst prime ministers of the last 5 years. But what I would ask you, Annunziata, is that you can't deny that he has this incredible gravitas and this way with words, as he illustrated in his Daily Mail column today, attacking Keir Starmer. Do you not think if he came back into the fray, if he goes out campaigning for the Tories, he kind of shows Rishi Sunak up as a bit of a dweeb, a bit of a pathetic leader compared?
I'm not entirely sure that Rishi Sunak needs anyone to show himself up. I think that he did a very successful job of doing that himself, sadly, as he, for example, announced the surprise election earlier this week, that it didn't go exactly well.
No.
But he is very clear, Rishi is very clear, that he is not a charismatic preacher-type leader. He's meant to be a pragmatist, a managerial type, a bit like when we had Theresa May. I can't say it's my style. It doesn't really appeal to me. I want a leader who's a leader, and I want the managers to be advising them and making sure things go smoothly. However, you do need both types of people in any party, and I think if they work together, it would be for the good of the whole country.
I think there's possibly a risk of overestimating Boris's appeal. Before he was ousted by the party, I think he was polling very badly, especially in red wall seats, which are the places that Conservatives would obviously love to keep hold of, which is very unlikely to happen. And also, circling back to immigration, OK, the ECHR, there's a debate over that as to what we can do about that and if it could help the government target illegal immigration. That's illegal immigration. We have record high legal immigration, which is a deliberate policy decision of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. So I find it difficult to believe that this is something that Boris Johnson would be able to do a very good job of defending if he was still leader of the Conservative Party and still Prime Minister.
You've obviously never seen Boris give a speech. It doesn't matter what the truth of the past might be. He is extremely good at spinning it as he wants it to be. That is one of his great skills. And I'm not saying it's necessarily an appealing one, but it's definitely a talent. And we do want as many talented politicians to be fighting for the Conservatives in this election as possible, because the alternative is that they are pretty much wiped out, that we end up with a Labour government that's in for not 5 years, but for far longer, giving it far more time to do huge amounts of damage, increase our taxes, drive towards net zero so that the cost of living crisis goes ever further out of control, making sure our borders are as porous as possible, because let's face it, the French haven't helped us so far, so why would they now, which seems to be the only platform they've got, scrapping all sorts of policies that could actually start to make things better. Now, we need to have the Conservative Party, as of the 4th of July, the 5th of July, in a position to regroup and fight back with good policies that reflect what the British people want.
All right, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for your time and your views there on Boris Johnson's return. Now, I mean, well, what you were saying there about Labour and the majority, that you were licking your lips at that point.
Well, it's a democracy and the people probably want a Labour government. We'll see in 6 weeks. I think that I think you were absolutely right, that the appeal of Boris Johnson is massively exaggerated. The Boris Johnson that did so remarkably well in 2019 does not exist anymore. You know, that base, that popularity, that belief in him has gone. And I think people try to rewrite history. He was extremely unpopular when he was ousted. There's a reason Tory MPs lost faith.
6 points behind in the polls when he was ousted.
But he was very unpopular. He had Corbyn level popularity numbers, which were very bad. And I think people are trying to dress it up as though he was still the person that existed in 2019. I do think, though, that, you know, Annunziata's right. There are places in the country where he probably will go out campaigning. Maybe we'll even see him on this channel.
Well, hang on. And Albie, don't reply, yes, me, to this question. But Michael Gove, in his resignation statement, said it's time for a new generation. Are we on a hiding-to-nothing talking about these politicians who've already had the job? Should we be focusing on who the new generation are?
I think yes and no. Boris is always going to be something that people want to talk about. He's exciting. There's always that thought of, well, what if he never got stood down? And it's a conversation I have with lots of other Conservative Party members at the moment. And people say, what I said, it was 6 points behind in the polls. And they sort of construct this whole alternative reality. And he could have come back when Liz Truss basically ousted herself because she was so bad at being the Prime Minister. And he chose not to, and was advised not to by people like Ian Duncan-Smith, who were his biggest cheerleaders because of what was going on with the Privileges Committee. So we can't forget that when we talk about Boris. But do I think we would be in a better or worse situation had we stuck with Boris now? I don't think any of us could have foreseen the situation that the Conservative Party is in currently when Boris was ousted. Maybe we would have been better off sticking with him. Maybe we'd be in the same place. We'll never know.
I mean, Alex, are you... I think, actually, if Boris had stuck around, I'm not sure I do agree that I think he could have turned things around.
He's a fantastic campaigner. Oh, look at what he managed to do during the Brexit election, let's call it that. He inspired the country, and this is what I was saying not that long ago on GB News. There is nobody with a big, bold vision for Britain anymore. And at least with the Brexit election, there was somebody coming out campaigning saying, this is what Britain is. We're going to be an independent, we're going to be our own, have our own songs. Well, I'm not,
didn't deliver on the pledges.
Hang on, well, that's a different story. I'm talking about whether the Tories would do well in an election campaign with Boris, and he is very good at selling. He's a fantastic political salesman, and nobody can take that away from him. He still holds a lot of weight to the extent where his videos on the Daily Mail are reposted on news outlets. So he's a big hitter and he's a great orator. And I agree with Annunziata that the Tories would be in a very different situation today. I think Keir Starmer would be shaking in his boots, frankly. I don't think there'd be all these calls for a general election. They'd want to wait to the last minute.
He said in his Daily Mail column today that Sir Keir Starmer can try all he wants to wrap himself in the Union flag like a really bad Jerry Halliwell tribute act. And actually, he does have a way with words. He's phenomenal.
He does, yeah.
But, I mean, Georgia, are you, just briefly, are you resolute, actually, that Rishi Sunak probably doing a better job than Boris could?
I think they're both as bad as each other, to be honest. I think, electorally speaking, I don't think there would be too much of a difference. I think possibly with Boris, it could actually be worse just because of how further there could have been just more Tory psychodrama with the Privileges Committee and that kind of thing.
Just on policy, Rishi's cut taxes, he's cutting immigration, and he sorted out the Windsor framework. Boris couldn't do any of that.
Okie doke. Folks, still to come tonight, Prince William, Sarah Ferguson and Keir Starmer walk into a bar. No, I'm joking. All feature in the bunch of 5, and we'll be answering some questions from you wonderful viewers. But next of all, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. But sadly, no one told Albie Amankona, and he's going to try his luck against me again in the Saturday scrap. This time, he's defending that net zero commitment that the Conservatives have made. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Apparently, alcohol abuse is costing England £27 billion a year. I mean, in fairness, that's the price of 2 rounds in London, Nicholas.
Yeah, tell me about it. Not that I'm a big consumer of alcohol. I'm very Mediterranean in my consumption. But revealed, alcohol abuse costs soar to £27 billion a year. So this cost basically encompasses a variety of aspects, from health-related problems, so the cost on the NHS, lack of productivity, people who lose their jobs, social services, and all that. And of course, it has been on the rise, 37% more compared to last time this was studied in 2003. So now Institute of Alcohol Studies and some other groups are pushing or asking for tougher taxes and tougher regulation. But is that the solution? Like in ancient Rome, they said, in medium stat virtus, like moderation, virtue is in moderation. And again, if they're going to raise the price, people like myself or yourself who are moderate consumers, pardon?
You're going to turn to heroin. Because it'll become... I mean, well, this is what's happened in Scotland.
It becomes unaffordable, so...
Yeah, in Scotland, they had minimum unit alcohol pricing, and so it pushes up the cost of getting off your tree for your average Scottish ne'er-do-well who likes to sit on a bus stop and drink a bottle of cider. So instead, they're turning to street drugs, which are cheaper by comparison.
That is just terrible. I like that the alcohol industry have come back on this. A guy called Matt Lambert, who's the chief executive of the Portman Group, and they represent the alcohol industry. And he says that the IAS, that's the group who've created this, have failed to take into account the significant direct economic contribution of the alcohol industry to the wider economic and social benefits of moderate and responsible alcohol consumption. Well, it's so true, isn't it? We've got a declining birth rate. We need people to get drunk and chat each other up.
Yeah.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, a shock new study reveals that working from home increases the risk of obesity and depression. It's time for Britain to go back to work. In My Take at 10, a new poll shows that 82% of the public admire Queen Camilla. If she was running for election, she'd win by a landslide. Plus the Hamiltons, feisty journalist Michael Crick and TV legend Christopher Biggins. We're live at 9.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Cheers very much for your company. Now, your emails and messages have come in. Earlier on, we debated whether under-16s should get the vote. And Mark says you can join the armed forces at 16 if you have your parents' written permission. So should you vote, or should you only vote if your parents fill in the ballot paper? It's a very good point. Left-wing Larry says, why are people still talking about Boris? He is gone. He is never coming back. Fact.
Oh, that makes me want to bring him back now.
But he also said hasta la vista, baby, in his end final speech
I'll
as
be
PM.
back. I'll be back.
The breaks.
Now, though, folks, it's time for this. Yes, that's right. If you thought Tyson Fury had it bad, get ready for this. It's time for tonight's main event. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, she entered the election fray. In the Telegraph, she suggested that if the Conservatives are to have the slightest chance of beating Labour, they need to scrap their net zero targets. Seems like a surefire vote winner to me, other than, you know, those OAPs who attacked the Magna Carta last week. All sensible people think it would be economically disastrous to impose this nonsense on Britain. But all sensible people, unfortunately, rules out my old mate Albie Amoncona, who thinks that embracing hugely unpopular policies is the key to winning elections. So it's round one, and Albie, I think you can take it away.
Darren, you're just spouting nonsense again. I mean, net zero as a policy is overwhelmingly popular with the British public. I do definitely think there was a discussion to be had about how we get to net zero. I think some of the targets that we have imposed need to be looked at. In fact, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister himself, pushed back some of the EV targets. So there is a sense of pragmatism going on. But to scrap the net zero targets altogether would be extremely unpopular. In fact, it was so unpopular that this whole idea of a referendum on net zero that Nigel Farage was talking about a couple of years ago didn't go anywhere because it was not a popular thing with the British public. It's not something people want to have a referendum on. It's something that most people broadly agree with. We should have a discussion about how we get there. We should have a discussion about how it impacts the most vulnerable in society. But we do have to get there. We must do it in a pragmatic and reasonable way, which is not economically harmful.
You know, I remember it was a couple of years ago now, but I remember it's sort of seared on my brain, the image of Barbara Bolton, she was from Greater Manchester, pensioner, and she died because she was so scared of putting the heating on, of putting that, you know, firing up that combi boiler, because she was so scared of her bills, of her energy bill that she would receive. That, I think, is as a direct consequence of the pursuit of net zero, because we do not cherish sustainable and actually, well, plentiful energy sources. We are actually an energy-rich nation. We should be able to provide cheap and plentiful energy. Now, the climate may well be changing. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Who knows?
Come on, Darren.
But we're not having a debate
about climate change.
We have to be able to actually deal with the weather. We have to be able to deal with the changes in weather.
We do.
And that requires energy, lots of energy.
Yeah.
But you can't do that with wind turbines and solar panels.
No, but you can with nuclear.
You need gas.
We need gas. We need small modular nuclear
you need
reactors.
Gas and nuclear.
That's what
I didn't interrupt you. Can you, for 1 second, just shut up? You need gas.
You're telling me to
you
shut
need
up
to
now.
actually provide people with cheap access to energy so that people like Barbara Bolton are a rare occurrence in this country. I fear that they will be a more regular one. I think we are placing poverty over power in this country. And I don't want to live in a country that actually does that. I think you say net zero is overwhelmingly popular with the British people. Well, if you actually ask them, are you willing to install a heat pump that might not work in your drafty house?
Like you didn't listen to
and they say no, absolutely not.
Right.
You say, oh, how will we get there? If the target in law is net zero by 2050, it doesn't matter. You can say, well, let's have an argument about how we get there all you want. We have to get there. That means drastically reducing our energy consumption.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
How does it not?
Darren, let me speak now.
How does it not?
You piped on for ages.
Answer that question.
We
How
need
does it not?
to make energy cheaper in this country by unleashing the next generation of supply-side reform on the economy, deregulating to make planning and infrastructure building easier, making small modular nuclear reactors easier to build in this country, as well as wind turbines, as well as solar panels, as well as all the energy infrastructure that we need. What is making energy bills expensive in this country, Darren? It's not mostly net zero. It is restrictive planning regulations that we have that make building anything impossible, that make infrastructure projects overly expensive, and that gets passed on to consumers. So I agree with you. We need to make energy cheaper. We need to have more power stations, more clean energy power stations, but we can have more energy and still get to net zero, because there are plenty of power sources which are not polluting in the same way of fossil fuels, which, by the way, Darren, are also running out. So what do you do once all of the oil and gas is gone?
Give over. I mean, honestly, the sound bites that we've heard coming from there, I had no idea we'd invited Keir Starmer to sit down and have a discussion about green energy, because that's who you sound like.
What, for promoting nuclear energy and planning reform? The IEA promotes
You just said wind energy and solar
The IEA
panels.
promotes what I've literally just said.
Answer this question. How would Barbara Bolton in Greater Manchester, how would she have heated a home if we only had at our disposal solar panels and wind farms?
I haven't for one second said
solar panels and wind farms.
I haven't for 1 second said only Darren, I'm going to tell you to shut up in a minute if you don't stop putting words into my mouth like you did earlier on. I have never for 1 second in my life said that we do not need oil and gas to transition to net zero. I've never said that. When have I said that?
You just did.
When have I said it? I didn't.
All right.
You're making things up.
Let's bring in the panel because
God, have you been drinking again?
He's going to tell lies. Right, Alex, who do you side with?
Well, Darren, I side with you on this one. This is pretty straightforward. And when it comes to industry, I mean, look.
So I'm wrong about planning and energy.
Hang on, let me get a word in, Albert. You just had 5 minutes talking. Give someone else a chance, right? So my point is this: when there's an industrial revolution into a new income of energy, let's say the industrial revolution, of course, is a good example as we started using fossil fuels. It takes time. It takes time for that progression, and it also takes businesses to adopt it. There were no quotas at the time to build X amount of factories. Those were just built because they were demanded by the industry. This is capitalism, right? So what I will suggest is that you will get to net zero, but you'll get to net zero when the appropriate time arrives. Rather than putting targets that punish people, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to punish people. Let the industry evolve. Let green energy...
By deregulating.
Well, that's not a bad idea, but you can do all those things without targets, right?
All right. Georgia?
Yeah, I think there's clearly a balance to be had here. We need to really ensure that working class people, especially, aren't penalised in terms of their bills. I don't think that's the right way to go about this. And also the developing world, I think that it's very easy for, Britain, we've already had our Industrial Revolution, to try and impose very, very strict targets on certain developing countries, and I think that's also the wrong way to go.
Yeah.
I think, as you're saying, Albie, nuclear energy is really the most important thing here, and it's just bizarre how not only are we not planning for the future doing that, we are also letting our infrastructure on that being taken over by sometimes hostile foreign countries.
France.
Yes.
It is obscene.
France, China, yeah.
I mean, I think there's a massive economic opportunity here. I don't accept that this is an inescapable burden to our economy.
It's not.
You've got trillions of pounds of investment available as the whole world is trying to get to net zero. And a country with a workforce as educated as ours, with the university sector and research sector that we have, has a huge opportunity to develop these technologies. And I think you are defeatist when you look at this, because there is so much money to be made, so many jobs to be created, and I think Britain should be on the front foot, not moaning about an extra £5 on a Ryanair flight.
But why do we need a law that restricts and prohibits carbon emissions? Why would we not allow the university sector, science and research to flourish, which we do in this country?
We don't.
That should be encouraged. Fine. I totally agree with that. I accept that. Industry can do whatever they want, right? I'm not going to seize their assets and all the rest of it in the name of not allowing them to come up with solutions if they want to. Fine, all for it. But I do think, though, the target, saying this arbitrary target, which is, it's just a nice sounding target. They've said, oh, let's pick a date, 2050, that'll do. And I think actually that is leading us on a path to madness. Let's come up with the solutions, fine, to cleaner energy, whatever, I don't care about that. But we cannot restrict the supply of energy in Britain in the name of green ideology that is going to severely harm the poorest people in Britain.
It's not an ideology, it's something called science, right? I know you don't know much about that after, all your COVID
Oh,
views.
yes, bloody
but the fact
Einstein
is,
there.
the fact is that we are against the clock because you can already see the damage of extreme weather events, of extreme heat, of extreme flooding. Of Bangladesh, a third of it was flooded last year.
Then? In that case, I agree. So
Indonesia, Jakarta, the capital, is going to have to move because it's going underwater.
All right.
Commonwealth countries in places like the Caribbean that are at risk of being flooded and going underwater.
Terrible.
We have to take action now.
So will you
because
commit
the consequences
to stop going on your flights around the world? You've just got back from Yemen. So actually, if we're in such a perilous emergency condition, you need to actually take action yourself, Benjamin.
Well, I mean, good news. I suspect that Yemen is a very low-carbon economy, so I was happy to endorse it. But you haven't. No, but you didn't listen to what I said, which is that you should develop technologies so that we can do these things in a way that isn't destroying our own planet.
We'll also add that we are a very low-carbon economy.
OK,
one of the best.
right. Still ahead.
You're full of hot
answer
air.
all of your questions in Ask the Five, so please do get them in. But next in Bunch of Five, is election fever actually a real thing? Could it be why Ben Leo's off? And it seems Prince William wants the young royals to start taking more of the limelight. What's his plan for the monarchy? Is it the right one? You're with the Saturday Five, live on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Over the next 24 hours, it turns increasingly unsettled. We'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain across the country, and that's all thanks to low pressure, which is going to dominate the rest of the bank holiday weekend, bringing areas of rain and heavy and thundery showers as well. We've already got rain this evening pushing in from the southwest. This will continue to drift northwards as we head into the early hours. Rain across eastern areas also continuing to push northwards into parts of Scotland. Some of this will be heavy at times, but with a lot more cloud around, it will be generally quite mild overnight. Temperatures remaining in double figures, but it does mean generally a grey, damp start across the UK Sunday morning with outbreaks of rain. However, northern Scotland, there will be some sunny spells first thing in the morning before cloud and rain pushes northwards from the south. As you can see across southern Scotland into Northern Ireland, a cloudy start, outbreaks of rain, but temperatures in double figures. Cloudy across the central swathe of England and Wales, but some brighter skies already pushing into southern parts of England and Wales there. And they will continue to push northwards as we move through the morning. However, as the temperatures start to rise, we'll see the clouds bubble up and we'll see heavy showers across much of England and Wales and southern parts of Scotland as we move through into the afternoon. Some rumbles of thunder possible, local disruption, generally staying cloudier for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland here with outbreaks of rain. A little cooler for most, temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, feeling a little warmer in the southeast compared to Saturday. On Monday, another day of sunny spells and showers for many. Some of these will be heavy at times, some longer spells of rain possible as well for parts of Scotland, and it stays unsettled Tuesday into Wednesday with further spells of rain in places. Temperatures near average.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, thank you very much for your emails about tonight's topics. Douglas says, well said, Albie. Do we want future generations to look back on us kindly, or shall we go down as the selfish bunch who ruined the planet for them? Benjamin Butterworth, he's talking about you. And Anna says, bring back Boris, bring back Maggie Thatcher, bring back Harold Macmillan. It won't change a thing. The nation wants change, and we only have just over a month to wait, thank God. Well, Now, though, it's time for this. Albie, why don't you take it off?
So I found quite a cute story in the Telegraph, actually, today about some of the palace receptions that have been happening in the Buckingham Palace garden. And the Telegraph reported that the Prince of Wales doesn't want to have a slimmed-down monarchy as his father does. But where the story came from, I think it's quite sweet, actually, was that apparently the Prince of Wales sent a WhatsApp message to his cousins, Princess Beatrice, Princess Eulogy and Zara Phillips, Tyndall, rather, now she is, and said, would you like to come and join me at this garden party? So we've learnt that the royal grandchildren have a WhatsApp group just like everyone else, so they're just normal, got their family cousins WhatsApp group, and that maybe it's a glimpse of the future, because with the monarchy that we have now, we've got 2 senior royals who are very unwell. It's really just Camilla and William who are the senior working royals. You've got the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, but they're not really as high profile. I think they were also at the event. But it does bring into the foreground, do we need to have more working royals? What do you think, Georgia?
Firstly, I'd love to say that the footage that we're seeing, Prince William has access to an umbrella, which Rishi Sunak clearly doesn't.
Yes.
To an extent, I agree with you, and I think also with some of the sad news we've obviously had about royals in the past few months, and obviously over a year ago with the sad death of the late Queen, I think having young people at the forefront definitely helps their image. I think that there's a risk of maybe kind of it being seen as stale and kind of something that's...
It obviously needs to happen, right? I mean, he's tried austerity measures for the monarchy and the size of the monarchy, slimming it right down, but it's backfired. And obviously he couldn't have predicted the very sad circumstance that we find ourselves in.
But you can't blame him for slimming it down, right? He obviously slimmed it down because he's seen all the drama through his own life and through others because of such a huge extended family. Obviously his brother, then his ex-wife, his son, and you could start... If you're Charles, you think, my goodness, is it better just to have a smaller royal family? But I do agree with what William is going to do, if this is what he's going to do. I do agree with it, because we obviously do need a bigger royal family than Charles thought.
All right, Georgia, what have you got?
So today I was reading about the fact that Sir Keir Starmer once again is going to be attacking private schools. So he wants to raise VAT on private schools. This will likely lead to many of the smaller ones which have funding issues anyway to collapse and to no longer exist, and probably a mass exodus of pupils from those schools into state schools anyway.
Okie doke. Well, I mean, where are you at on that?
Well, I don't think that private schools should have an exemption from VAT that applies to pretty much everything else. If you have a private tutor, for example, VAT would be applied to that. And I think the same should be the case for private schools. It was Winston Churchill who removed it from these. It used to be the case that only a handful of private schools had this exemption. And I think at a time when, you know, not recently in this Parliament, you had an outrage because there were lots of incredibly poor kids who weren't going to get fed during the summer holidays. The idea that we're giving tax breaks to a very small proportion of the population who overwhelmingly is quite wealthy to be able to send their kids to private school.
Leaving the state sector by not sending their kids to state school.
I don't think that you should have tax breaks for people who've got 40 grand spare a year to send their kid to Eton or Winchester, as Rishi Sunak went to.
It's not tax breaks for the people. It's tax breaks for to actually keep those private schools afloat.
I think we're a better society if that investment is going into our state sector to make sure that everyone has access to a great education, not just people with 100 grand.
The reality is we're only raising like 1.1 billion, which is a drop in the ocean. It's not going to really do anything.
Right.
Where's the money going to go?
All right, I want to play this clip.
No.
Because all of you are saying, oh, I want to go, because where is the next party? What are we meant to be doing next? But what I want to say is, why are we here? What is the future? And why are we not making our planet better for the youth of tomorrow?
If you couldn't tell, that's Fergie, Duchess of York, and, well, former, I guess, but, you know, still go. And Fergie, they're shouting at the audience, telling them to hush, and she kept removing her microphone, putting it back and saying, can you hear that? And it's like, well, no, Fergie, actually, because you keep moving the mic away from your mouth. And she was saying that we should all listen in the name of, well, the planet.
She's nuts.
Why shouldn't we make the planet better for our youth? God forbid.
Wait, the people you don't want to hear this from are people who are extremely wealthy and privileged.
And I should say, this was from Cannes Film Festival, one of the most elite
I wonder how
out of the sort of elite calendar.
Yeah, I wonder how expensive that dress was. I wonder how many air miles it took for her to fly in her private
Oh, now
jet.
who's attacking aspiration?
Well, hang on. What, you've just been on an air jet to some foreign country somewhere, haven't you? Well, did you wear a nice dress and give a speech to the locals as well? Did you? Wouldn't have surprised me, actually.
Look, I think, well, she is the Duchess of York still. She kept the title.
Yeah.
She isn't a working royal. You know, she makes her own living and makes her own decisions. She doesn't do it as the royal family. I think, actually, she's one of the few who has a star quality and a popularity in the royal family. She's very popular in the US, and I suspect the royals should use more of her.
I don't think she is all that popular. People still remember her sucking on toes.
I think she's hilarious. I do just find her... I reckon she'd be really fun on a night out.
Yeah.
All right, Alex, what have you got?
Yeah, so election fever. Apparently, election fever is a real thing. So this is some sort of illness you can get, stress-related, apparently, when general elections come around. So this is a journal, a health journal, that came out and said that 19% of first-time voters may suffer from election fever. And if Keir Starmer has his way, that'll be half of the young population in hospital, putting those NHS wait times up. Hey, so maybe Ben Leo is off with a bit of election fever at the moment. But have you ever suffered from such a thing, Ben?
Well, you better hope you don't get ill, because there's 7.5 million people on the waiting list for the NHS.
No, it's only going to double under Labour, isn't it?
But, you know, well, it's obviously not, no. And, you know, lots of people are going to be showing up red, not just how they're voting in the polling booth.
All right, interesting. Albie, what do you think? Have you ever had a bit of stress around a general election on who to vote for, hovering over that Lib Dem box where you possibly belong?
This is just such an unfunny joke. I don't know why people...
I think it's pretty good,
I don't know why it's so unoriginal. Oh, you're actually a closet Lib Dem. Like, well done, have a gold star. Look, I won't be hovering over my vote during the election. I think this election fever thing is nonsense. People need to get off their posteriors, get down to the polling station and vote for the Conservative Party.
All right, Benjamin. Well, mine is Mark Zuckerberg, who is the owner of Meta, that's Facebook and Instagram, is facing a boycott from some of his shareholders because they say he's not looking after the safety of children who are using the apps. It's after there was a case of a teenage girl who was groomed, and it's caused an outrage that Facebook didn't take enough action, they say. And so do you think that these big companies like Facebook should have statutory or shareholder required expectations to actually tackle the kind of bullying and abuse that is going on?
Yeah, I mean, well, it sort of touches on what we were discussing earlier, right? Which is, you know, these things are allowed to happen and take place, and how do we actually tackle them? But, I mean, how could we do that as the United Kingdom?
The thing is, the reason they don't put the resource into tackling all the things that happen on places like Facebook is because it costs them money.
Yeah.
So actually, I think the shareholders standing up to, you know, a multi-billionaire like Mark Zuckerberg and saying, actually, we're going to make decisions on what we put in this company if you don't deal with protecting kids, I think that's a good idea.
Well, they can take action. Try being a Conservative on Facebook.
Well, that's true, actually. Yeah, you're completely censored. But the problem is with the way that shareholders are, the way the whole actual company is structured, right? Because what you're saying is you need to have some regulations around what shareholders can determine a company to do, and there are boards for that. So, you know, shareholders as a whole, which there may be millions of them in Meta, don't actually get a final say on policies at Facebook because the company is structured that way. So you're talking about complete global reform of businesses, which is highly unlikely, unfortunately. You're better off getting it through policies through the United States or the European Union or Great Britain, where we put forward great policies and other people tend to follow suit.
OK, still ahead, folks. It's the part of the show where you take charge as we all answer your questions in Ask the Five. You're with the Saturday Five, live on GB News.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News, weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant or anything sort of like that, in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, you know, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, you know, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
But I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
That has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you know, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, you know, times change. You've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. No emails here because we're cracking on with your questions. That means it's time for this. Let's see what you've got for us this week. This is from Charlotte. Charlotte says, hi, I've got an ethical dilemma for you. I gave my boyfriend's sister, where's this going, a lift up to Nottingham from London for his birthday party. She didn't so much as offer to chip in for petrol. I was going anyway, but this seems a bit mean. It's something you would do, Benjamin?
No, it's not. I'm incredibly generous. Look, that's just bad manners, I think.
Yes.
You know, because...
How would you just tell her that's bad manners?
Well, look,
we're driving to the cash point.
I'm too direct with people, I think I would say. But yeah, I think she's right to be annoyed.
Would anyone not ask for the money?
No, I would always...
I don't know that I'd ask for the money, but I think she should offer.
I think instead of asking us what we think, I think, Charlotte, that you should actually just ask her about it. It's not an awkward thing. Just say, hey, boyfriend's sister, whatever her name is, let's call her Jane for the purposes of this argument. We drove all the way to Nottingham. Would you mind chipping in for half the tank of petrol? And she'll probably say yes.
Do you know what I'd do? I'd just drop her off somewhere really inconvenient next time.
But it does say she was going that way anyway, so would Jane, or what's she called, not be able to turn around and say, well, you were going that way?
Well, that would be bad manners. At that point, I'd say that's bad manners. Maybe I'd get my boyfriend involved in that case. Well, it's his sister.
It's like when I get on a train, why do they charge me? It's going that way anyway.
This is in from Susanna. She says, good evening, you five. Man of the people, Rishi Sunak, will no doubt be cheering for Southampton in the playoff final tomorrow. Which sports teams do you lot follow? Benjamin, which sport team do you follow?
He's like,
does he know sport? What is the sports?
Look, you know, I love the sports ball game. As a kid, I liked Liverpool because I liked Michael Owen. I'm related to Marcus Rashford.
Wow.
Were you related to a slave owner or something?
No, it's
oh my God! Cut the feed.
It's through a marriage on my maternal side of my family, and my niece actually plays for Man City girls team. So there's a lot of sport in my family. It skipped me, however.
Alex,
personally, look, I love a bit of football, but I'm a big rugby fan, so I really love national rugby, Six Nations. But if I'm watching football, it's Crystal Palace.
All right, I support Newcastle United.
I've inherited support for Tottenham Hotspurs, though I don't particularly follow them. I do, I suppose, foster an inherent dislike for Chelsea.
I inherited support for Manchester United, and I think, did we win today?
Yes, you did, yeah.
Yes, we won.
Well, obviously aren't much of a big support if you didn't know they just won, Albie.
Next is this one from Matthew, very briefly. Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom have joined the mass exodus at the general election. Will we see one of them on the Saturday 5? Well, yes.
I think Albie's planning a swap, right?
Who would you prefer out of Michael Gove or Andrea Leadsom, Benjamin?
Do you know, Michael Gove is... probably
clever.
my favourite Tory because I think he is an intellectual. I think he has real ideas, so I respect him. But I reckon Andrea Leadsom would be a lot of fun on this show.
Yes, I think so too. Anyway, right, we're going to have to leave it there, my friends. Thank you very much to our guests tonight and the brilliant Georgia Gilley and Alex Armstrong. Viewer James says, loving the Saturday 5, and why is Alex Armstrong so handsome? Alex, if you ever fancy a date, I'll get the train down to London. And this has been Blind Date with me. Next up, it's Leo Curse with the Saturday Night Showdown. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Over the next 24 hours, it turns increasingly unsettled. We'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain across the country, and that's all thanks to low pressure, which is going to dominate the rest of the bank holiday weekend, bringing areas of rain and heavy and thundery showers as well. We've already got rain this evening pushing in from the southwest. This will continue to drift northwards as we head into the early hours. Rain across eastern areas also continuing to push northwards into parts of Scotland. Some of this will be heavy at times, but with a lot more cloud around, it will be generally quite mild overnight, temperatures remaining in double figures. But it does mean generally a grey, damp start across the UK Sunday morning with outbreaks of rain. However, northern Scotland, there will be some sunny spells first thing in the morning before cloud and rain pushes northwards from the south. As you can see, across southern Scotland into Northern Ireland, a cloudy start, outbreaks of rain, but temperatures in double figures. Cloudy across the central swathe of England and Wales, but some brighter skies already pushing into southern parts of England and Wales there, and they will continue to push northwards as we move through the morning. However, as the temperatures start to rise, we'll see the clouds bubble up and we'll see heavy showers across much of England and Wales and southern parts of Scotland as we move through into the afternoon. Some rumbles of thunder possible, local disruption, generally staying cloudier for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland here with outbreaks of rain. A little cooler for most, temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, feeling a little warmer in the southeast compared to Saturday. On Monday, another day of sunny spells and showers for many. Some of these will be heavy at times, some longer spells of rain possible as well for parts of Scotland, and it stays unsettled Tuesday into Wednesday with further spells of rain in places. Temperatures near